Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here. Obviously, this is something that's very important. Mr. Wood, I want to start with you, and it's pretty clear, at least to me, that congressional intent and that EPA regulations, that manure was never intended to fall under this category within RCRA. And I'm just wondering, prior to this Washington ruling, what were the regulatory requirements that dairy farmers had to follow for manure under the law?
Thank you, Congressman. The language in the Code of Federal Regulation is pretty clear that RCRA is not to apply to livestock manure or to crop residues returned as fertilizer or soil conditioners. I want to very quickly just mention some of the areas dealt with in the 2013 consent order. Lagoon testing and liners, soil testing, groundwater monitoring wells, detailed reports, composting, stalls, testing pipes, and more were all dealt with in that consent order in 2013. Was the citizen lawsuit the last resort? Absolutely not. It was filed in 2013 against the dairies. So arguing that it didn't resolve the problem, I think, is not supported by the timeline on this. The Dairy Nutrient Management Act governs our dairies, EPA, Department of Ecology, and more.
In that lawsuit, as I understand it, the judge found that the farm's manure storage facilities weren't constructed to USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service standards. Can you explain those standards to me? I'm not really familiar with those. What did that mean?
Yeah, the NRCS standards deal with the proximity to groundwater, the shape, the size, the permeability. There was no record of compliance with NRCS standards, not because they didn't comply, but because they didn't receive NRCS funding. And so some farms that build the storage lagoons on their own will not go to NRCS for matching funds. And so NRCS did not have a record of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Ms. Romig, this case, this Washington case, really opened up new legal pathways against farmers, and under a bill, as we said earlier, that was never intended for manure to be included. Have these lawsuits, these citizen lawsuits, have they changed the way environmental regulations are enforced, in your opinion?
In my opinion, they're trying to enforce existing regulations. So they're not claiming that the regulations aren't sufficient. They're claiming that the agencies aren't doing so. And in this lawsuit, I'd like to point out in Washington that whether or not the district courts have jurisdiction is dependent upon whether or not something has been prosecuted. But in the Washington case, you had 111 pages and multiple experts just to determine whether it was manure regulated by RCRA or not. And that's not what's supposed to happen in the federal courts. You're not supposed to have all of these experts just to determine whether the court should even act. Okay,
then given this case may have been a case that, a situation, and an example of where the citizen filing a case, filing a lawsuit was not necessarily, and I'll go ahead and say abused. Have you seen cases where it was useful?
Yes. In fact, there are times, and in fact, just even the process of starting a citizen suit is useful. You have to file notice with the agency that you think there's a problem, and that allows the agency to realize there's a problem and to step in. The notice is also useful because if you're the regulated entity, it gives you an opportunity to fix what they're complaining about before you have the lawsuit. So the process is useful. But I think it can be pushed too far, and our courts have consistently held that when an agency is diligently prosecuting, that they should be given the first crack at this. And then the regulated agencies should, or the regulated entities should receive comfort if they're working with the agency that they won't be subject to further litigation.
So you've seen cases of abuse, you've seen cases also where it can be useful.
Absolutely. I have used them in cases to be useful.
Okay. Point well taken. Okay, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you. Thank you all.
Gentleman yields back his time.